It was one of the hardest days of my life. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my phone, trying to make sense of what I had just read. My heart squeezed tight in my chest, and a cold feeling started to creep over me. The message from Michael wasn't anything complicated, but those words hit me like a punch. "You won't be going on the trip. Jessica wants it to be just for her family." I couldn't believe it. I had been planning this trip for years. Every extra penny I earned, every hour I worked, was meant to make this happen. A family vacation to Hawaii, a place that had so much meaning for me. The place where your grandmother and I spent our honeymoon. I thought it would be a way to reconnect, a chance for all of us to be together again. But now, in a single message, I had been cut out. How did it come to this? How did I go from being the center of their lives to being someone they no longer needed? I had always been there for them, worked hard, sacrificed everything I could. But somewhere along the way, I had become invisible. I had spent most of my life working at a small private company, saving a little here, a little there. No fancy paychecks, no recognition, just steady work. I was never rich, but I was proud of what I had. Now, at 67, I thought I could finally enjoy some of what I had worked for. But now, that dream fell out of reach. It wasn't about the trip, really. It was about the way I had been treated, about how little my family seemed to care. It was about realizing that I had spent so many years chasing their approval, trying to keep everything together, only to find that, when I stopped being useful to them, I was forgotten. I had spent my life being the provider, the fixer. And now, when I needed them, when I needed to be seen as part of the family, I was cast aside. The more I thought about it, the more the pain settled in. It wasn't just about not going on the trip. It was the realization that I had been replaced. My son and his family, the people I had poured my time and energy into, didn't need me anymore. I wasn't just excluded from a vacation, I was excluded from their lives. I sat there for hours, my thoughts swirling. I wanted to scream, to call Michael and demand an explanation, but I knew that wouldn't change anything. They had already made their decision. And deep down, I realized that maybe I had been the one to let it go this far. I had always tried to please them, tried to be the perfect father, grandfather, and husband. I had given them everything I could, but somewhere along the way, I forgot about myself. For the first time in years, I felt something shift within me. It wasn't just hurt, it was a sense of clarity. I had spent so long giving and expecting something in return, but now, I understood. I didn't need their approval to be happy. I didn't need to beg for a seat at their table. I could create my own path. And so, I made a decision. Instead of wallowing in self-pity, instead of waiting for someone to change their mind, I chose to do something different. I looked at the money I had saved for the trip. It was a decent sum, enough for a few weeks in Hawaii. But I realized that this wasn't the trip I needed to take anymore. It wasn't for them. It was for me. And I wasn't going to waste it on something that felt hollow. I thought about the people at church, people who had supported me when I had no one else to turn to. They had given their time and love without asking for anything in return. Some of them had never even been on a vacation in their lives. They worked hard, they gave to others, and yet they never took time for themselves. I decided I would take them to Hawaii. I called a few of them and explained the idea. I think they thought I was joking at first. But slowly, the idea began to take root. These people, these friends from my church, were the ones who needed a break. They deserved to see something beautiful, to experience life outside the everyday grind. And I could give that to them. It wasn't about revenge or bitterness. It was about giving back to people who had always been there for me. It was about showing them that they mattered, that they deserved to be seen, just as much as anyone else. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a purpose again. I wasn't just planning a trip. I was offering something meaningful, a chance for them to feel seen, appreciated, and loved. I spent the next few days organizing the trip. It wasn't easy. I had to rearrange everything, change the booking, contact travel agents, plan out the details. It felt like a new chapter was opening, one that I had been waiting for but didn't know was possible. The idea of giving something back to people who had never asked for anything in return felt right. And as I made the calls, I could hear the surprise in their voices, first disbelief, then excitement. They didn't believe me at first, but when the plans began to fall into place, I could see how much it meant to them. There was Carol, who had raised her children alone and never once thought about taking a vacation. Louise, who had spent her life caring for her sick husband, but never allowed herself a moment of peace. Frances, who had always been there for her friends and family, but had never received the same care in return. And Beverly, who had worked tirelessly as a nurse and never taken a break for herself. They were all amazing women, women who had quietly sacrificed their own dreams for others. And now, for the first time, I could give them something they deserved, a moment of joy, a moment of rest, a chance to breathe. It wasn't about showing my family what they had lost. It wasn't about revenge. It was about doing something good, something kind, for people who needed it. I thought about how many times I had given without expecting anything back. Maybe that was the lesson I needed to learn, that sometimes the most important thing is to give without expecting anything in return. To be selfless not because you're looking for validation, but because it's simply the right thing to do. The trip wasn't just for them, it was for me too. I realized that I wasn't just letting go of my old expectations. I was opening up to new possibilities, new relationships, and new experiences. These women weren't just guests, they were friends, people I could rely on and who would see me for who I truly was, without the baggage of unmet expectations. And as I sat there planning the trip, I felt something inside of me shift. I didn't need my family's approval to be happy. I didn't need them to acknowledge the sacrifices I had made for them. I had found a way to be seen, to be appreciated, and that was all I needed. The day arrived, and I could feel the excitement building inside me. I watched as the women from church gathered together, their faces filled with disbelief and joy. I had never seen them so alive, so eager. They had always been the ones to give, to take care of others, but now it was their turn to be cared for. It wasn't about luxury or extravagance. It was about something far more precious, the gift of experience, the chance to see the world through fresh eyes. We boarded the plane to Hawaii, and I couldn't help but smile as I watched them. Carol, Louise, Frances, Beverly, and the others, each of them had lived their lives in quiet sacrifice, never asking for much. But now, they were getting the chance to experience something they never thought possible. For the first time, they were free to enjoy the world, to take in the beauty that life had to offer without worrying about the needs of others. As we landed in Hawaii, I felt a deep sense of pride. This wasn't just a vacation, it was a gift, a chance for these women to reclaim a piece of themselves that they had long since lost. And it was a gift for me as well. I had never imagined that something so simple could bring so much meaning. Watching them walk through the villa, their eyes wide with awe and wonder, I realized just how much they deserved this moment. They had given so much of themselves, and now it was time for them to take something back. Over the next few days, we explored, laughed, and shared stories. I saw them bloom in a way I had never seen before. It wasn't just about the beauty of the place, it was about them rediscovering their worth, about them learning to be seen and valued for the incredible women they were. And as I watched them, I realized that this wasn't just about giving something to them, it was about giving something to myself, too. For the first time in a long time, I felt seen. I wasn't just a man who worked tirelessly for his family, the one who had been forgotten and overlooked. I was someone who could make a difference, someone who could bring joy to others. I had found my place, not through sacrifice, but through giving in a way that truly mattered. This trip was teaching me something important. I had spent so many years looking for validation from my family, trying to prove that I was worth their love, worth their time. But what I was beginning to understand was that validation doesn't come from others. It comes from within. It comes from knowing that you are enough, just as you are. And I was starting to feel that deep in my soul. The days in Hawaii passed in a blur of sun, sand, and laughter. The women and I explored the island, visited the beaches, and savored the beauty of a place that felt like a dream come true. For them, it wasn't just about the sightseeing. It was about reclaiming their sense of self, about taking back the joy they had given away for years. I watched as each one of them experienced something new. Carol, who had always been the one taking care of everyone else, finally relaxed, letting go of the weight she had carried for so long. Louise, who had never taken a break from caring for her sick husband, allowed herself to breathe, her face lighting up with each new discovery. Frances, who had spent so much of her life focused on others, started to laugh again, her spirit lifted by the freedom she felt in this new environment. And Beverly, who had always been too busy working as a nurse, now found herself soaking in the beauty of the ocean, of life in its purest form. The transformation wasn't immediate, but it was profound. There was something magical about seeing them embrace the beauty of the world, not just with their eyes, but with their hearts. I saw them shed years of responsibility, of guilt, of selflessness, and begin to embrace the idea that they were worthy of the very happiness they had been so willing to give to others. But it wasn't just the women who were being changed. I, too, was beginning to feel something stir within me. Watching them rediscover themselves made me realize how much I had been living for everyone else. I had spent so many years thinking that my value came from what I could give, from what I could do for others. But this trip was teaching me that my worth didn't come from what I could provide, it came from simply being who I was. One evening, as we gathered around the fire pit on the beach, the warmth of the flames mingling with the cool ocean breeze, I thought about my own family. I thought about Michael, about the empty spaces that had formed between us over the years. I knew things weren't perfect between us, and I wasn't sure if they ever would be, but I realized in that moment that I didn't need them to see me the way I had always hoped they would. I didn't need their approval or their acknowledgement to feel whole. I had found something deeper here, with these women who had taught me the value of simply being seen and valued for who I truly was. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I didn't need my family to fix things for me anymore. I didn't need them to make it right. I had done that for myself. I had learned to stand on my own, to find my own strength, and to know that I was enough, just as I was. The last few days of the trip seemed to slip away too quickly. We were all so wrapped up in the newfound sense of freedom and joy that it was hard to believe we were nearing the end. I had watched these women, who had spent their whole lives giving, slowly learn to take. They learned to take time for themselves, to laugh without guilt, to rest without feeling selfish. It was more than just a vacation for them, it was a quiet revolution in their hearts. As we sat together one evening on the deck, watching the sunset over the ocean, I couldn't help but feel a wave of gratitude wash over me. I had given them this trip, yes, but in return, they had given me something just as valuable, a lesson in self-worth, a reminder that sometimes the most important thing you can do is care for yourself. I glanced around at the women, all of them lost in their own thoughts, yet together in this shared experience. Their faces, once weary and burdened, were now filled with light, filled with joy. They had become the women they were always meant to be, the women they had forgotten in the years of self-sacrifice. And I realized, in that moment, how much they had unknowingly healed me. I didn't know how the trip would end, or what would happen when we returned home, but I knew one thing for certain: I had found a new kind of family. A family not defined by blood, not defined by obligation, but by shared moments of understanding and mutual respect. A family that saw me for who I truly was, not for what I could do for them. And just as I was reflecting on all of this, my phone buzzed. I picked it up, and my heart skipped a beat when I saw the name, Michael. He hadn't called me since the message I had received at the beginning of this journey. I hesitated for a moment before answering. When I picked up the phone, his voice came through, tentative, like he was unsure of what to say. "Hey, Dad," Michael said. "I've been thinking a lot about everything. I'm sorry. I know I hurt you. I didn't mean to make you feel like you didn't matter. I've been a fool." I stayed silent for a moment, not sure what to say. I hadn't expected an apology, let alone one that felt so genuine. It wasn't what I had hoped for. It was more than that. It was a recognition of everything I had done for him, everything I had given, even when I had been overlooked. But more than anything, it was a moment of clarity. "I appreciate you saying that, Michael," I said, my voice steady. "But you don't have to apologize anymore. I've made peace with all of this. I've learned that I don't need your approval to be okay. I'm finally okay." The silence on the other end of the line was comforting, not awkward. It was the silence of two people who had begun to understand each other, who had reached a point where words didn't need to fill every gap. "I just wanted you to know," he said quietly, "that I see you now. I see everything you've done, and I don't take it for granted." And I realized, in that moment, that we didn't need to fix everything at once. It wasn't about returning to what was, or forcing our relationship to be what it used to be. It was about understanding that we were both on our own journeys, and that we could walk beside each other without forcing anything. We could heal in our own time. When we landed back home, I felt a strange sense of peace that I hadn't anticipated. It wasn't the kind of peace you feel after everything is fixed, or after a perfect resolution. No, this was something deeper, a calm that came from knowing that I had changed. I had finally let go of expectations, and in return, I had given myself permission to simply be. The house didn't feel as cold as it had before. I spent a few quiet mornings in my garden, tending to the plants I hadn't given enough attention to in years. The familiar surroundings felt different now, like I was rediscovering them. And in some ways, I was rediscovering myself, too. My phone had been quiet since the conversation with Michael. For the first time, I wasn't sitting around waiting for his calls, his messages. I didn't need his approval. I wasn't hoping for a breakthrough or a grand gesture. I had already made peace with myself, and that was enough. I no longer needed him to validate my worth, and I had let go of any anger or resentment that had once weighed heavily on me. I thought about my time in Hawaii, and I smiled. The women from church, who had never once asked for anything, had taught me something I hadn't realized I needed to learn: how to take a moment for myself without guilt. How to rest. How to live without constantly measuring my value by what I could give. They had given me a glimpse into what I had been missing all these years. A few days later, Michael called again. His voice was different this time, calm, sure. We talked briefly about the trip, about how everything was going in our lives, and then he surprised me with a question. "Dad, would you like to get together sometime soon? Just you and me. I want to spend some time with you. I think it's time." It wasn't an extravagant offer. It wasn't a grand gesture to make up for years of missteps. But it was enough. It was real. And in that moment, I realized that we were both moving towards something new. Not something perfect, but something real. Something based on mutual respect, understanding, and care. I smiled as I put the phone down. I didn't need everything to be perfect. I didn't need the past to be rewritten. All I needed was this moment, this quiet understanding between us. And for the first time in a long time, I realized I was okay with that. I didn't need to hold on to the old wounds anymore. They had healed, not through apologies or grand gestures, but through time, through letting go, through accepting the present for what it was. As the weeks passed, things settled into a comfortable rhythm. Michael and I continued to talk, but there was no pressure to fix everything. Our conversations weren't about grand apologies or deep heart-to-hearts anymore. They were simple, easy. We talked about our days, about little things that mattered to us in that moment. And for the first time in a long time, I realized that the relationship I had with him didn't need to be something it was not. It could be quiet. It could be steady. And that was okay. I also spent more time with the women from church, continuing to share meals, stories, and moments of laughter. They had become my new family, and I had learned so much from them. They didn't expect anything from me, and in return, they gave me the gift of being present. I had stopped waiting for recognition from my blood relatives, and I had found peace in the understanding that true family doesn't always come from who you're related to. Sometimes it's the people you choose, the ones who choose to stand by you, no matter what. I still thought about my old family, though, about my children and grandchildren. I still missed them in a way, still wondered if we would ever return to the way things once were. But I no longer felt desperate for it. I was learning to live with what I had, to live in the present instead of constantly reaching back for what was lost. And I knew that was the first step toward healing. One afternoon, I sat in my favorite chair, reflecting on how far I had come. I had learned so much over the past few months. I had learned to give without expecting anything in return, to receive love without feeling guilty, and most importantly, to love myself without needing anyone's approval. It wasn't easy, and it didn't happen overnight, but I had finally learned to accept myself. I had learned that my worth wasn't tied to what I could do for others, and that love and care are not measured by the sacrifices you make, but by the simple act of showing up for yourself. A few months passed, and life began to settle into a quiet rhythm. I kept busy with my volunteer work at the church and spent my free time taking care of the garden and reflecting on everything that had happened. I had made peace with the things I couldn't control, and I had learned that happiness didn't come from external validation, it came from within. Then, one afternoon, the phone rang. I wasn't expecting it, but when I saw the name, I knew it was Michael. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I answered it anyway, curious about what he had to say. "Hey, Dad." His voice was calm, but there was a warmth in it that I hadn't heard in a long time. "I've been thinking a lot about everything lately, and I just wanted to check in. I know things aren't perfect, but I've realized that I want to make more of an effort with you. I've been busy, but I don't want you to feel like I'm not here." There was a moment of silence on my end. I had been expecting something like this, but it still hit me harder than I anticipated. I didn't have to wait for his approval anymore. I didn't need him to come around and apologize for the past. But hearing him say those words, that he was willing to make the effort, was enough for me. It wasn't about fixing everything. It was about moving forward, one small step at a time. "Thank you, Michael," I said softly. "That means a lot to me. I'm okay, really. I've come to understand that our relationship doesn't need to be what it was. It just needs to be real, and I'm happy with that." I could hear the relief in his voice when I said that. It wasn't about seeking perfection, about rewinding the past. It was about accepting where we both were and being okay with it. We didn't need to make grand gestures. We just needed to be present, to show up for each other in whatever way felt right. "I'll see you soon, Dad," he said. "Let's just keep going forward. One day at a time." And that was it. I hung up the phone, feeling lighter than I had in a long time. I realized that everything I had been seeking wasn't out of reach anymore. It was already here, in these small moments of connection, in the quiet understanding that was finally beginning to form between us. The following weeks felt different. Lighter somehow. I didn't realize how much weight I had been carrying, how much I had been clinging to old hurts, to the idea that I had to prove my worth to others. It was like a fog had lifted, and I could finally see clearly. The conversations with Michael were no longer full of expectations. They were simple, about his day, about what was going on in our lives. Sometimes there were still awkward silences, but they were filled with understanding now, not tension. We didn't need to resolve everything at once. We were just two people learning to coexist in a way that felt natural, without all the pressure to be something we weren't. I continued spending time with the women from church. Every month, we met for coffee, and our bond grew stronger. They had become my family, and I had become a part of theirs. There was something incredibly comforting about being around people who didn't expect anything from you, who simply enjoyed your company for who you were. We didn't talk about the past, but we often shared small, meaningful moments, like when Carol found the courage to book her first solo vacation, or when Louise finally decided to visit her childhood home, a place she hadn't been to in decades. They were living, really living, and it made me feel alive again too. And as I saw their transformations, I realized something. The love I had been seeking from my biological family, though important, wasn't the only love that mattered. I had learned to love myself, and in turn, I was able to love the people who had shown me what true family could be. One day, as I sat at the kitchen table, drinking my morning coffee, I thought about the trip to Hawaii. It had started as a way to fix something broken, to heal the wounds of my past, but it had turned into something far more meaningful. It wasn't just about giving to others, it was about rediscovering myself, about learning that my worth wasn't tied to anyone else's approval. I wasn't waiting for some grand revelation or a perfect resolution. I had already found peace. It wasn't a magical moment, but rather a collection of small, quiet decisions I had made over time. I was enough. I had always been enough. I spent the following months living in a way I hadn't in years. It was subtle, but the change was real. I no longer felt the urge to chase after validation or try to prove my worth. Instead, I focused on the simple things, the steady rhythm of my mornings, the way the sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, the quiet joy of tending to my garden. These were the moments that filled me with peace, the moments that reminded me I didn't need anyone else to make me feel whole. I continued with my work at church, helping with the community events and getting involved in things that mattered. I wasn't doing it for recognition or to fill a void. I was doing it because I wanted to, because I found fulfillment in the act of giving, but now I was giving from a place of fullness, not emptiness. I no longer felt the need to pour myself out just to be seen. And it wasn't just the people at church who appreciated me. I realized that I had started to enjoy my own company in a way that I hadn't before. I no longer felt that gnawing loneliness that used to creep in when the house was quiet. Now, the silence was comforting. It was mine to enjoy. I had become my own companion, and I realized that this was the truest kind of peace I could find. One evening, as I was sitting on the porch watching the sunset, I thought about the future. I had learned that life doesn't need to be perfect. It doesn't need to fit into some ideal that you've constructed in your mind. It's about the journey, the small steps you take, the moments you treasure. It's about learning to be okay with who you are and where you are, without constantly seeking approval from others. I thought about Michael again, and the progress we had made. I had forgiven him, but not because I was waiting for him to fix everything. I had forgiven him because I had learned to forgive myself. I realized that forgiveness isn't a gift you give to others, it's a gift you give to yourself. And in doing so, I had created a new space for myself to grow, to heal, and to be happy. A few more months passed, and as the seasons changed, so did I. It was a slow transformation, like the gradual unfolding of a flower. There were days when I still missed my family, when I longed for the old connection I had once felt with them. But I wasn't clinging to the past anymore. I had stopped waiting for things to go back to what they once were. Instead, I was learning to accept things as they were, to embrace the present without regret. One evening, Michael called again. I wasn't expecting it, but when I picked up, I felt a strange calm in my chest. It wasn't anxiety or a desperate need for resolution, it was simply a quiet knowing that we were both doing the best we could. "Hey, Dad," Michael said. His voice sounded different, more at peace, as though he, too, had found some semblance of clarity. "I've been thinking about everything. About how we've both changed. And I just wanted to let you know that I see you now. I see what you've done for me, for everyone." I didn't respond right away. Part of me wanted to jump in with a flood of words, to tell him everything I had been feeling, but I just let the silence linger for a while. It wasn't awkward. It was just a moment of mutual understanding. We were finally learning to listen. "I'm proud of you, Michael," I said quietly. "And I want you to know that I've let go of all the old stuff. I don't need anything from you, son. I just want you to be happy. I want you to live your life the way you need to." There was a long pause before he spoke again. "I'm getting there, Dad. Slowly. I think we both are." That simple exchange, though brief, marked a shift. We weren't trying to fix anything anymore. We weren't trying to relive the past or create some ideal version of our relationship. We were simply accepting each other as we were, imperfect, but still connected. As I hung up the phone, I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes for a moment. I had finally let go of the need to be anything other than what I was. I had stopped searching for approval, stopped trying to earn my place. I had realized that my worth was never dependent on anyone else. It had always been within me. And in that moment, I knew something important. I had finally made peace with myself. I had learned to stand on my own, not out of bitterness or regret, but out of a quiet understanding of who I was and what I had done. I didn't need anything from the world anymore. I was enough, just as I was. As the months passed, I continued to grow, slowly but steadily. The work I did at church, the time I spent with my friends from the community, and the small moments of solitude were all reminders of the life I had built for myself. I didn't have to wait for anyone's approval or validation anymore. I had found peace in just being. It wasn't perfection, but it was real. Sometimes, when I sat in my chair in the evening, watching the sunset or sipping my coffee, I would think back to those early days, when I felt so lost, so forgotten. I thought about how I used to measure my worth by what I did for others, by how much I gave, always expecting something in return. I had spent so many years waiting for my family to appreciate me, to see me for who I was. But now I understood that my worth didn't come from what I gave or what I sacrificed. It came from who I was. I had finally let go of the need to be needed. I had stopped waiting for my children to understand me, to give me the love I thought I deserved. Instead, I had given love to myself. I had learned that the most important relationship I would ever have was with myself. I had to accept that I could be content, even if my family didn't see me in the way I had always hoped. It was no longer about fixing the past. It was about embracing the present. One day, as I was sitting on the porch, watching the leaves rustle in the breeze, I got a message from Michael. It was simple. "Hey, Dad. I was thinking about you. Hope everything's good. Let's grab coffee sometime soon." I didn't feel that rush of excitement like I used to. It wasn't a desperate need for approval anymore. It was just a quiet acknowledgement that, yes, things were good. I was good. I didn't need anything more. The doorbell rang later that week, and when I opened it, there stood Michael, holding a coffee cup in his hand. He looked different, more at peace, less burdened. We didn't say much at first, but we didn't need to. We just sat, sharing the warmth of the moment. "Thanks for the coffee, son," I said, taking a sip. "No problem, Dad," he replied. "I'm glad you're doing well." And for the first time in a long time, I realized that we were both finally doing well. We were healing, not because of some grand gesture, but because we had learned to be present with each other without expectation. It wasn't perfect. It didn't need to be. We had come full circle, and that was enough. It wasn't long after that simple coffee meet-up with Michael that I began to truly feel the full weight of the transformation in our relationship. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't anything that would make the headlines or even be noticed by many. But for me, it was monumental. We still didn't talk every day, but we didn't need to. It wasn't the frequency of the contact that mattered. It was the quality of it. I had let go of so many expectations over the years. The desire to make things right, the need to push for something that wasn't there, it all faded. We were both learning. And in that I saw hope. Real, quiet hope. The kind of hope that doesn't demand anything from the future, but simply appreciates the present. It wasn't just my relationship with Michael that had changed. I had begun to embrace this new phase of my life with open arms. I still spent my days volunteering at the church, meeting with my friends from the community, and helping those who could use a hand. But there was something different now. It was no longer about filling a void or looking for validation. It was about giving because I wanted to, not because I had to. The stillness in my heart became something I could hold on to, a kind of peace that I had never thought possible. I didn't have to fill every moment with busyness. I didn't have to prove my worth to anyone, not even to myself. I had learned, finally, that simply being was enough. A year passed, and though life hadn't stopped moving, I had found a steady pace. Michael and I still checked in with each other, but it wasn't about solving problems or fixing anything anymore. It was just life, life shared between a father and a son, not based on what had been or what might be, but on what was. One day, Michael came by and brought his family with him. It wasn't a grand event, but it was one of the most meaningful moments I'd had in years. We sat around the table, having dinner, talking about simple things, what they had been up to, what was going on with the kids, their plans for the future. And for the first time in a long time, I realized I wasn't holding my breath. I wasn't waiting for the next thing, the next apology, the next confirmation that I mattered. I already knew. I didn't need to hear it. As I sat there with my son, my daughter-in-law, and my grandchildren, I couldn't help but smile. I didn't need them to apologize anymore. I didn't need them to fix anything. The past was the past, and I had found peace with it. I had finally learned that I was enough. Not because of what I did for others, but simply because of who I was. And in that truth, I found the kind of peace I had spent my whole life looking for. We didn't say much that night, but that was okay. The silence between us felt comfortable, warm. It wasn't awkward anymore, it was just us. And that, I thought, was the most beautiful thing of all.